I lit the last candle and took a step back. The table looked lovely, simple, quiet, just the way I liked it. I'd baked the cornbread myself that morning, and the roast was resting under foil. Nolan and Jenna sat on the couch behind me, both glued to their phones. They hadn't offered to help set the table, but I didn't expect them to anymore. When I brought over the pitcher of iced tea, Jenna looked up, not even smiling. "Happy birthday," she said flatly. Nolan nodded, without lifting his eyes. "Yeah, happy birthday, Mom." I sat down at the head of the table and folded my hands. There was a short silence before Jenna cleared her throat and reached into her tote bag. She pulled out a tablet and tapped it awake. "We wanted to talk to you about something important," she said. Nolan finally looked up, almost rehearsed. "We think it's time you start sharing your savings. You've done well for yourself, Mom. It's only fair." Jenna turned the tablet around. A spreadsheet. My retirement account was listed at the top, accurate down to the cent. My chest went still. "We worked out a plan," she continued. "If you transfer half into a joint fund, we could invest in a bigger place. For the future." I didn't speak. Nolan pushed the tablet closer. "We're family. Families support each other." I looked at the spreadsheet, then at their faces. They weren't embarrassed. They looked proud of themselves. I reached for my glass and stood. "Well," I said calmly, "if we're sharing everything, then I suppose you'll be fine when I make the first move." Jenna blinked. "What does that mean?" I raised the glass in the air and smiled. "To family." Then I drank, sat down, and served myself first. Jenna didn't touch her plate. Nolan kept looking at the spreadsheet like it was going to save him. They didn't know it yet, but I'd already decided. I just needed the night to pass quietly, so I could begin quietly setting the line they'd already crossed. They moved in 6 months ago on a Thursday that started with a frantic call and ended with Jenna dragging 2 suitcases across my kitchen tiles. We lost the lease, she'd said, eyes wide but dry. The landlord wanted the place back to remodel. Nolan had wrapped his arm around her and added, "Just a month, Mom? Just until we figure things out." I said yes. I always said yes, because he was my only child and because no one else had ever asked to stay. But a month turned into 3, then 6. Jenna's shoes slowly began to line the hallway, heels, boots, sneakers. Nolan's gaming setup took over the dining table, wires spilling over placemats I hadn't used since Christmas. They cooked twice a week, but never cleaned up. Groceries vanished, and when I restocked, I'd find empty wrappers tucked behind couch cushions or dishes soaking in the sink for days. They never offered to pay rent. I brought it up once. Nolan chuckled and said, "You don't charge family, right?" I told myself it was fine, temporary, that I could live with the noise, the mess, the missing piece, that I could wait it out. But then came my birthday and that spreadsheet. They weren't just living in my house. They were setting terms, making plans for money I hadn't even spent myself. That night after dinner, I lay in bed with the door closed, lights off. I could hear Jenna in the hallway, FaceTiming someone, laughing about how easy this would be. I heard Nolan's voice too, lower, careful, asking if I'd taken the bait. My stomach turned. I sat up and turned on the lamp. It wasn't just about the money. It was about ownership, of space, of silence, of me. And suddenly, I wanted to know just how far they'd already reached. I waited until the house was still, until I could no longer hear the muffled voices from the guest room or the thump of Nolan's keyboard from the dining room. Then I got up. In my bedroom, tucked under a folded towel in the back of the closet, sat a small metal box. I placed it on the bed and entered the code. The lock clicked open. Inside were envelopes marked by month bank statements sorted chronologically, and a flash drive I hadn't touched in over a year. I started with April. I scanned the statement line by line, brow furrowing when I saw a $2,000 withdrawal labeled as online transfer, external. I didn't remember that. My fingers moved faster. May showed another $3,500, this time with the same label. I opened my laptop, inserted the flash drive, and pulled up my digital records. Each month's income and expense report was there, and those transfers hadn't been in my original notes. So where had they gone? I logged into my secondary savings account, the one I kept separate from my retirement fund. It was meant for emergencies, house repairs, things that required planning. But the balance was off, lower than I remembered. And there, buried in the transaction history, were the same unexplained transfers. A different browser window was still open, Nolan's. He often used my laptop when his was running slow. The Wi-Fi account was under my name, and months ago I'd given him the password. I clicked on the router settings. Someone had added a device with admin access last March. I felt my fingers curl around the edge of the desk. He'd been inside the system, inside my accounts. These weren't just accidents. They were moves. I pulled the receipts from April and May, placed them in a folder, and slipped it into my bag. I found Nolan the next afternoon, standing by the shed, pretending to fix the lock that hadn't worked in years. His head was down, sleeves rolled 1 foot, nudging a broken rake. I didn't raise my voice. I just stepped into the sunlight and said his name. He looked up too quickly. "You've been transferring money from my account," I said. His mouth moved, but no words came. Then a shrug. "It's not stealing, Mom. You weren't using it." I waited. "And Jenna's family? They're struggling. You know that." I nodded slowly. "Then maybe they should ask their mother for help." He flinched like I'd slapped him. "That's not fair." "No, what's not fair is siphoning off money from the person who gave you a roof." "It's just a couple thousand, 5,000, I corrected. "That I know of." He looked past me, jaw tight. "You're overreacting." But his voice shook at the edges, and his hands stayed clenched by his sides. I stepped closer. "You used my Wi-Fi to link into my savings. You installed a browser extension that saved my logins. You forged a withdrawal label so it wouldn't flag me. You didn't just take, you planned it. I was going to pay it back." "No, you weren't." His silence was louder than any admission. I turned to leave. "You don't understand how hard it's been for me," he called out. "You had a career. You had stability. I've been trying." Trying doesn't mean stealing. His shoulders dropped, and for a moment he looked small. But I didn't soften. I walked back toward the house, past the rose beds and the broken wind chime, my pulse. Calm, but my hands steady, with something firmer than anger. I opened the side door and locked it behind me. Then I called my lawyer. The office was quiet, tucked between a dentist and a title company. My lawyer, Carla, listened without interrupting as I laid out the folder of receipts, bank printouts, and a copy of the access logs. When I finished, she leaned back and said calmly, "You're not overreacting. You're catching it just in time." Together, we set up a trust, irrevocable and out of reach. My retirement, the house deed, and the emergency fund would now be protected, all under my control, with no outside access unless I allowed it. She walked me through every step. No panic, just precision. Back home, I made a second pot of coffee and opened a new spreadsheet on my laptop. I began listing everything in the house that was mine. Not just valuables, but proof receipts, photos, serial numbers. Jenna's shoes in the hallway wouldn't be on the list. I changed every password. Email, Wi-Fi, even the printer. I logged Nolan out of every shared streaming account, disconnected his admin access, and installed security software on my devices. Then I set up cloud backups and placed my new inventory on an encrypted drive. The cameras came next. 2 inside, 1 in the front hallway, 1 near the guest room door. Quiet, discreet, motion triggered. Another faced the driveway. I told no one. I wasn't looking for confrontation. I was preparing for the moment they tried to turn this house into theirs. That moment came faster than I thought. 3 days later, while tidying the kitchen, I found a sheet tucked behind the toaster. A printed withdrawal slip from my savings account, dated the week before my birthday. Signed. With my name. Only it wasn't my handwriting. I stared at it, fingers frozen. They weren't just testing boundaries. They were erasing them. I slid the slip into my file folder and zipped it shut. That night, I didn't sleep. I just lay there, listening to every door creak, every floorboard shift, every whisper through the walls, and waited for morning to come. I made stew that night. The kind Nolan used to love, beef carrots, thick broth, served with cornbread still warm from the oven. I placed 3 bowls on the table, wiped my hands on a towel, and sat down like it was any other evening. Jenna was the first to speak. She didn't even taste the food. So she said, stirring the bowl absent-mindedly, "Did you think about our proposal?" I didn't flinch. I reached under the table and set a folder in front of her plate. "What's this?" she asked. Flipping it open. "Everything you've taken," I said. "In print?" She frowned, scanning the list, withdrawal dates, itemized grocery tallies, utility over ages, even timestamps from my savings account. Her fork clinked against the bowl. Nolan leaned over, eyes narrowing. "You kept track of all that. I'm a retired postal worker," I replied, meeting his stare. "Not a fool." Jenna's face flushed. She closed the folder too hard and pushed it aside. "This is insane." "What's insane," I said quietly, "is thinking I wouldn't notice my account's draining." "You said we could stay here?" Nolan snapped. "You never said there were rules. I didn't think I needed to." He stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. "Unbelievable." "You're right," I said, lifting my spoon. "It is." Jenna stormed out first. Her footsteps echoed down the hall, then the sharp slam of the guest room door. Nolan hesitated longer. He looked at me, part anger, part something else. Shame, maybe? Or fear. Then he turned and followed her, slamming the door behind him. I sat alone, eating slowly the stew, now lukewarm. The silence felt heavier than their shouting. After I finished, I gathered the bowls, rinsed them one by one, and set the empty folder by the door. It would be there in the morning. But by then, I had already made the real decision, the one they never saw coming. They were already in the kitchen when I came down the next morning. Jenna stood with her arms crossed. Nolan slouched against the counter, expression tight. I didn't sit. I placed 2 manila envelopes on the table. "You have 48 hours to find another place to stay," I said. Nolan blinked. "You're kicking us out. I'm asking you to leave." "We have rights," Jenna snapped. "You can't just evict family." "You were never tenants," I said evenly. "You were guests. Now you're not." Nolan opened one of the envelopes. Inside were printed screenshots, withdrawal slips, and the photo of the forged signature. "So that's it. After everything." "Yes," I said. "This is my home." Jenna's voice rose. "You'll regret this. We can go legal. You can't just dump your own family on the street." "I'm not dumping anyone. I'm ending a situation that has gone too far." Nolan shook his head like he couldn't believe me. "You're not the woman who raised me." I looked at him. "I am. You just stopped seeing her the moment she said no." They left the room in silence. That night, I saw Jenna's post. A long paragraph with a filtered photo of her looking teary-eyed, claiming I was mentally unstable, calling me abusive, saying I'd turned on them suddenly and left them homeless for no reason. She tagged Nolan, and a few of their friends chimed in with sympathy. I didn't reply. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I took screenshots, time-stamped them, saved them to a folder. Then I walked through the house, making a list of what they still needed to pack, labeling what wasn't theirs, locking anything important behind doors they didn't have keys to. 48 hours. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was ready. And when the time came, I would be the one standing at the door, steady, silent, and done. The alert came at 9:12 a.m. I was sipping my coffee, sorting laundry, when my phone buzzed twice, first from the bank app, then from an automated voicemail. Attempted withdrawal of $5,200 from joint account ending in 1789. Joint account? I never opened a joint account. I set the laundry basket down and pulled up my files. Sure enough, the account number matched a savings line I hadn't touched in over a year, one I'd forgotten existed until now. But someone hadn't forgotten. And whoever it was had tried to walk out with more than $5,000. I drove to the bank with the folder on the passenger seat beside me. I didn't call ahead. I wanted to look someone in the eye when I said it. The manager, a kind woman named Patrice, sat me down in her office. I explained what had happened. She pulled the digital record on the screen. There was a request to link this account to an external debit card, she said slowly. And we do have a scanned signature from the authorization form. May I see it? I asked. She turned the screen. It was my name, but not my hand. The E in Marlene curled upward, like Jenna's cursive. The signature was practiced, but not perfect. I pulled out the original one from my tax returns and laid them side by side. They forged this, I said calmly. And they've done it before. Patrice nodded. Would you like to report identity theft? I met her gaze. Yes. Yes, I would. She made a copy of my file. I handed over the printed screenshots, the past withdrawal forms, and the photos of the last forged slip. Every document had been prepared days ago, just waiting for the moment I needed them. As I left the bank, I felt a quiet shift. They weren't just entitled or reckless anymore. They were dangerous. And I wasn't going to wait around for the next move. The envelope came from Carla, my lawyer, with a note that read, "Thought you should see this in person." Inside were photocopies of rental agreements, 3 pages stapled neatly. The first one looked like any standard lease, except it listed me as a co-signer for an apartment I'd never seen. The date. 3 months ago. The name beneath mine. Jenna Walker. They didn't just forge my signature again. They submitted it as legal proof of financial responsibility. I stared at the copy, my breath tight. The loops were wrong again. The tail of the M didn't dip. The grant was too round, too neat. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. Carla had already filed the complaint for forgery and financial abuse. They're escalating, she said. But so are we. That night I made tea and sat by the kitchen window, watching headlights pass along the road. Upstairs, the floor creaked. Then came the sound I was half expecting. A fist slammed against my bedroom door. Mom Nolan's voice sharp and angry. I didn't move. "This is still my home," he shouted again, hitting the door harder this time. "You can't just throw us out. You're making a mistake." I sat on the edge of the bed, silent. Let him shout. "You think locking up your accounts and waving papers at us makes you smarter?" His voice cracked. "Jenna said it would work. She said you'd fold." Still I didn't answer. There was a pause. Then something quieter, almost a whimper. "You're my mother." Silence followed. Eventually, his steps moved down the hallway, and I heard the door to the guest room slam shut. I waited another 5 minutes before I got up and poured the water out. The kettle had cooled. But I didn't need it anymore, because tomorrow, everything would begin. They arrived mid-morning, 2 officers in clean uniforms, firm but calm. I opened the door before they knocked. I'd been expecting them. Mrs. Grant, one asked. "We're here to serve a notice of removal. Your lawyer said you'd be home." "I'm always home," I said quietly. They handed me the form for my records, then moved to the driveway. Jenna was the first to react. Her shriek cut through the air like a broken siren. "You can't do this. This is illegal. She's senile. She's insane." The neighbors peeked from behind curtains. I didn't flinch. I simply walked to the mailbox, hose in hand, and turned the nozzle. The roses needed watering. Nolan stood behind Jenna, not saying a word. His arms were crossed, his jaw tight, but he wouldn't look at me. Not once. The officers stayed professional. One escorted Jenna back inside to gather her things. The other stood near Nolan, who muttered something under his breath and walked toward the car. I kept watering. It took 27 minutes. I counted, without meaning to. 2 suitcases. 1 plastic bin. Jenna sobbing, Nolan stone-faced. No goodbyes. The car door slammed. The engine started. They didn't glance back as they pulled away. The moment the taillights disappeared, the house exhaled. I hadn't realized how much air it had been holding. I wound up the hose, clicked it off, and wiped my hands on my apron. The mailbox held nothing that day, just a single leaf that had blown in from the sidewalk. I flicked it out and closed the lid. The quiet was different now, not heavy or lonely. Just mine. I stepped back toward the porch, paused by the threshold and looked around. No dishes in the sink, no shoes in the hall, no voices demanding explaining, twisting. Only the hum of the fridge and the soft creak of the floorboards welcoming me back. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like oxygen. And for the first time in months, I didn't brace for the next storm.